The frigid December morning of 2010 began with an unusual stir on Juniper Avenue in Boulder, Colorado. 7 unmarked police cars quietly pulled up in front of a 2-story gray house tucked behind snow-dusted pine trees. Neighbors peered through curtains as officers in tactical gear fanned out around the property, encircling it in eerie silence. Inside, Richard Allen Pierce, 82 years old, was preparing his morning coffee, a routine he had followed for years as an exemplary former banker, World War II veteran, and respected neighborhood figure. A rapid knock echoed at 7:18 a.m. Richard Allen Pierce, Colorado Bureau of Investigation. We have a warrant for your arrest in connection to the 1951 disappearance of Evelyn Moore. Officers later recounted that the old man's hands trembled slightly as he set down his coffee cup, but his face remained strangely calm, as if he had known this day would come and had been waiting for it for nearly 6 decades. Before diving into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to stay updated on the latest cases. In the winter of 1951, Fort Collins was a small Colorado town, nestled quietly amid snow-covered mountains. The biting cold kept the streets nearly empty, with only the warm glow of lights spilling from a few taverns and restaurants along the main road. In this tranquil setting, Evelyn Moore, a 26-year-old nurse at Boulder Valley Hospital, was a familiar face in the community. Colleagues admired her dedication, and to her mother, Margaret Moore, she was the sole pride of their modest suburban home. Evelyn had been in a relationship for several months with Richard Allen Pierce, 32, a World War II veteran now working as a banker. To outsiders, Pierce was polite and educated, widely respected, but Evelyn's friends had noticed his overly controlling nature, intense bouts of jealousy masked by a composed exterior. On a mid-December evening, as snow began to fall heavily, Evelyn and Pierce visited a small tavern called What a Tavern in the town center. Regulars later recalled seeing them seated in a corner for quite some time, their conversation gradually turning into an argument. Pierce appeared angry while Evelyn remained silent, her face weary. As they left the tavern, she quickly said goodbye to the server and stepped out with Pierce into the blinding snow. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. The next morning, Evelyn's shift at the hospital began, but she didn't show up. Colleagues, assuming she was ill, called her home, but no one answered. By afternoon, Margaret hadn't seen her daughter return, and the dinner table remained untouched. Subsequent calls were met with endless ringing and silence. By that night, as hope faded that her daughter would walk through the door, Margaret donned her coat, trudged through the snowy street to the Fort Collins police station, and reported Evelyn Moore was missing. Margaret's report was officially logged the following morning. The police department immediately assigned an officer to the case, and Detective Harold Barnes, a seasoned investigator with over 20 years in Fort Collins, was tasked with leading the investigation. He began by gathering the most basic information about Evelyn, her workplace, daily routines, and recent relationships. The initial report described her as a disciplined and reliable woman, with no signs of mental distress or personal conflicts. Evelyn lived with her mother in the suburbs, worked consistently at Boulder Valley Hospital, and had never taken sudden leave. Colleagues described her as punctual, dedicated, and never absent without prior notice. From these early findings, Barnes concluded that her disappearance was not voluntary. He expanded his list of contacts, starting with those closest to her. The first person called in for questioning was Clara Whitmore, Evelyn's close friend and co-worker. Clara revealed that in recent weeks, Evelyn had been increasingly stressed due to her relationship with Richard Allen Pierce, the 32-year-old banker. According to Clara, Pierce was outwardly courteous, but highly possessive and prone to jealousy. Evelyn had confided that she wanted to end the relationship and had arranged to meet Pierce to discuss it clearly on the night she vanished. Clara recalled that was the last time she received a message from Evelyn. After verifying this information, Barnes noted, last person to see the victim, Richard Pierce. The police contacted the bank where Pierce worked, confirming he was at work the next morning and appeared normal. When summoned to the station for cooperation, Pierce responded over the phone in a calm voice, stating that Evelyn wanted to leave town temporarily to rest and avoid stress. He showed no signs of worry or unease. Barnes found the response suspiciously convenient, as if rehearsed. He requested Pierce appear in person for questioning, but Pierce cited a busy meeting schedule and asked to postpone for a day. While waiting, Barnes had officers check hotels, train stations, bus depots, and hospitals in the area. No one named Evelyn Moore had checked in or been admitted during that time. The leads dried up suspiciously fast. By late afternoon, the case was officially opened under the code Adult Missing Person, Circumstances, Suspicious. On the first page, Barnes underlined 3 key points: no signs of voluntary departure, no contact. Last seen with Richard A. Pierce. This marked the beginning of an investigation that at the time, even Barnes couldn't imagine would span nearly 6 decades. Detective Harold Barnes began the next day with a systematic series of interviews, starting at What a Tavern, Poudre Valley Hospital, and the neighborhood where Evelyn lived. At the tavern, the manager confirmed it wasn't overly crowded that night. Evelyn and Richard's table was in a secluded corner near the heater, and they spoke quietly for most of the evening. The server distinctly remembered Richard's tense demeanor, frequently interrupting Evelyn as she tried to explain something. A couple seated nearby reported hearing Richard accuse her of no longer making time for him and saw Evelyn step outside briefly before returning, looking exhausted. No one witnessed physical violence, but most accounts described a tense atmosphere and Richard's angry glares. Barnes recorded all statements, obtained a copy of the payment receipt, and collected the list of staff on duty that night for later cross-referencing. Leaving the tavern, he visited Poudre Valley Hospital, where Evelyn worked. Personnel records showed she had never missed a shift and had no history of extended leave. The head nurse and 3 colleagues noted that recently, Evelyn had been arriving a few minutes late due to lengthy phone calls, often from Richard. On one occasion, he showed up at the parking lot to pick her up and argued when she stayed late to handle patient files. Another colleague recalled Evelyn requesting a shift change to avoid working late because her boyfriend didn't want her working nights. When asked, they all described Evelyn as cautious, conflict-averse, and seemingly under strain in her personal relationship. Barnes requested the hospital's administrative office to pull records of calls received in the past month. Initial results showed Richard's number appearing frequently during shift changes, reinforcing suspicions of his persistent control. That afternoon, Barnes visited the neighborhood where Evelyn and her mother lived to interview neighbors. A couple next door confirmed seeing Richard's car parked across the street on multiple evenings, sometimes with him standing on the sidewalk smoking. A woman down the alley recalled hearing a minor argument between the two earlier that month, with Evelyn's voice sounding weak and Richard speaking loudly before leaving. No one suspected the situation could escalate to something serious, but all agreed Richard was around her home too often. From these fragmented accounts, Barnes identified a clear pattern of controlling behavior by Richard, monitoring her workplace, frequent calls, and even surveilling her private space. He organized the evidence into categories: at the tavern, control through conversation; at the hospital, control through communication; in the neighborhood, control through physical presence. Each category was logged separately in the preliminary report. Before ending the day, Barnes called Clara Whitmore back for additional testimony. She brought a small notebook detailing Evelyn's confidences. According to Clara, Evelyn had resolved to definitively end her relationship with Richard after multiple failed attempts to reconcile. She planned to have a frank discussion at the tavern, setting clear boundaries and demanding he stop his surveillance. Clara also revealed that about 2 months prior, Evelyn had a faint bruise on her neck after an argument, but refused medical attention, saying it was just him losing his temper. When pressed, Clara recalled that on the night of the disappearance, Evelyn called her in tears, saying things had gone too far. Barnes noted this detail and requested verification from 2 of Evelyn's colleagues who might have seen the injury. By the end of the day, he reviewed Evelyn's financial and personal records. There were no signs she planned to leave town. Her payroll account was active. Monthly bills were paid regularly, and no train tickets or shipped belongings were found. Her desk at the hospital held no farewell letters or notes. All collected evidence pointed in one direction. Evelyn had no reason to leave voluntarily, and her relationship with Richard Pierce was in a state of crisis. Harold Barnes concluded his initial report with 3 key observations. Pierce exhibited clear controlling and jealous behavior throughout their relationship. Evelyn had expressed her intent to end the relationship just before her disappearance. And there was no evidence she left Fort Collins for personal reasons. These lines were underlined in red in the case file: romantic conflict, central factor in the initial investigation. After compiling all the witness and friend testimonies, Detective Harold Barnes decided to take a crucial step: inspecting Richard Allen Pierce's residence. It was a small house on a quiet street on the southern outskirts of Fort Collins, about a 10-minute drive from the town center. Barnes, accompanied by 2 officers, knocked on the door on Monday morning, just as Pierce returned from his shift at the bank. The man opened the door with a mix of surprise and wariness, but invited them inside. From the first moment, Barnes noticed something off. The air carried a faint smell of gasoline and fresh cleaning solution. On the wooden table in the living room sat a half-finished glass of liquor next to a newspaper open to the local news section. The house was unnaturally tidy, the wooden floor still damp, as if recently scrubbed. When asked, Pierce explained that he had cleaned over the weekend, a habit of living alone. The officers carefully inspected the rooms, noting the condition of the furnishings. In the bedroom, the bed was covered with fresh sheets, but the closet held only 1 set of old linens, missing the matching bedspread. When questioned, Pierce said he had sent it for dry cleaning because it was stained from spilled wine. The explanation seemed plausible, but Barnes marked the detail in his notebook. In the bathroom, he noticed the white porcelain sink. There were faint, reddish-brown streaks near the drain. When Barnes inquired, Pierce claimed they were rust stains from old pipes. One of the accompanying officers used a cotton swab to collect a sample, carefully placing it in a small vial. Without a modern lab, they used a phenolphthalein test solution, a simple method to detect blood traces. The liquid turned pale pink within seconds. Barnes said nothing, only exchanging a glance and a slight nod with his colleague. He asked Pierce to recount the night Evelyn disappeared. Pierce said they left the tavern together. She seemed tired and wanted to take a walk. He claimed he drove her near a park and let her walk home alone. "I don't know what happened after that," he emphasized, his voice calm. When Barnes pressed about the time they left the tavern and the driving route, Pierce's answers were vague and inconsistent with the witnesses' descriptions from the bar. During their exchange, Barnes noticed a faint scratch on the cuff of Pierce's sleeve, like an old scuff not yet faded. When asked, Pierce said it was a minor injury from fixing the car. All these were details hard to prove, yet each piece gradually clarified the picture in Barnes's mind. A man trying to stay calm by repeating the same story, but with small inconsistencies piling up. At the end of the inspection, the police photographed the entire house, collected samples from the floor and sink, and asked Pierce to sign a voluntary consent form for the search. He signed, but his eyes betrayed clear caution. As the team left, Barnes lingered in the yard for a moment. Through the window, he spotted a shovel propped upright in the corner of the shed, its blade still caked with damp soil. When he approached and asked, Pierce said he had shoveled dirt to clear the garden after the snow. Barnes noted this detail, and at that moment, the sky began to darken, the wind carrying a chill and a faint whiff of gasoline from the yard. Back at the station, he wrote a preliminary report. The house was unusually thoroughly cleaned, presence of solvent and gasoline odors, missing bedspread. Small blood trace tested positive with phenolphthalein, suspect outwardly cooperative but inconsistent in statements. However, state law at the time required direct evidence or clear signs of a crime to obtain a broader search warrant. Barnes knew that with what he had, he couldn't yet request an arrest or detention. He could only continue observing, waiting to see if the faint traces in that house would open a new investigative path. 2 days after inspecting Richard Pierce's residence, Detective Harold Barnes decided to expand the search scope. The subtle traces in the suspect's home combined with his professional intuition, convinced him that Evelyn Moore was not far away. An urgent meeting was held at the Fort Collins police station, gathering all investigators, suburban patrol teams, and 2 Larimer County K-9 units. The search plan was clear: focus on areas along the Cache La Poudre River, where dirt roads led out of town, sparsely traveled, but close enough for a car to access unnoticed. From early morning, nearly 30 people split into small groups, each equipped with maps, flashlights, shovels, and probing poles. Light snow fell, and biting winds along the river made movement difficult. But everyone understood time was running out. Any clues could be buried or washed away in the coming days. Barnes, with 2 officers, directly led the first group, starting at a dirt road connecting College Avenue to a branch of the Cache La Poudre. At a narrow turn, he noticed faint tire tracks running parallel, partially covered by snow, but with clear tread marks beneath. The surrounding soil was disturbed, as if someone had made a sharp turn or veered onto a smaller path toward the river. He knelt to inspect, touching the hard, cold ground and noting a faint oil stain. The tire tracks were marked with wooden stakes and photographed. Deeper in, the thin snow layer revealed patches of darker soil mixed with sand and mud. A young officer spotted a long skid mark leading to a smaller rut toward the riverbank. Barnes ordered the group to spread out and probe the area. Near a leaning willow tree, he saw a small object half buried in the snow, a piece of white fabric with a light blue pattern. When pulled out, it was a fragment of a medical blanket, the kind used in hospitals. The edge was torn, stained with mud and what appeared to be dried blood. Not far away, another officer found a woman's thin handkerchief embroidered with the initials EM in silver thread at the corner. A brief silence fell, broken only by the howling wind and the continuous click of the camera. Barnes personally placed both items in sealed evidence bags, noting the time, location, and scene markers. He said nothing, but his eyes grew tense. Each piece of fabric, each trace, seemed to point toward a story he wasn't ready to accept. The search team expanded the radius downstream, wading through ice-covered reeds, checking every tree root and rock crevice. The K-9 units sniffed the area, but showed no strong reactions, likely because scents had been erased by the weather. By midday, heavier snow reduced visibility, forcing Barnes to pause the search. At the command vehicle, he reviewed the topographic map. The evidence site was less than 3 miles from the main road. A car could stop, unload something, and leave unnoticed. He marked the area in red ink and called the station to request technical support for analyzing tire tread and soil composition. While waiting, another group reported a shallow dug-up patch about 50 meters from the initial site, but it contained only soil and sand. No body, no further clues. Still, everyone felt it. This area had seen recent activity. By late afternoon, Barnes called off the first day's search. All evidence was sealed separately, labeled, and sent to the technical unit. He personally wrote the preliminary report. Discovered suspicious items: fragment of medical blanket and handkerchief with victim's initials at the Cache La Poudre riverbank, along with tire tracks leading to the scene. No body or signs of survival found. Search to be expanded. On the drive back, as the vehicle passed the slope to the river, Barnes glanced out the window. Snow had covered the tire tracks, leaving only a few wooden stakes protruding from the cold white expanse. He knew the search was just beginning, but his gut told him that whatever lay beneath that ice had been silent for days. 2 days after the initial search along the Cache La Poudre River, the Fort Collins police received a new tip. A man working at a suburban farm west of town reported seeing a dark-colored car parked on a dirt road for days unclaimed. Detective Harold Barnes immediately went to the scene with 2 officers. The road to the area was narrow and winding, flanked by snow-covered fields, rarely traveled in winter. Upon arrival, they found a black Chevrolet Fleetline alone at the edge of a slope, its rear wheels half sunk in wet mud, the windows coated with thick frost. The license plate matched Evelyn Moore's registered vehicle. Barnes had the scene photographed before touching the car. The driver's door was locked, the others tightly shut. The headlights were off, and no key was in the ignition. The tires were intact, but the road showed faint skid marks, as if the car had stopped abruptly or attempted a tight turn. There were no signs of a collision, but the fender was caked with mud and fresh small scratches. Through the window, they saw the front seat tilted askew, the floor covered with dried mud and bits of wild grass. A thin women's coat, the kind Evelyn wore to work, was draped over the passenger seat. Barnes, gloved, used a tool to unlock the door. The air inside was cold and smelled of dampness. He noted the windshield was intact, the dashboard untouched. On the driver's door handle, he found a long, dark brown hair, darker than Evelyn's lighter hair in photos. The hair was collected and sealed in a separate bag. The back seat had mud marks mixed with faint fingerprints, their origin unclear. All details were meticulously photographed before the car was towed to the station. As the technical team sealed the vehicle, Barnes stood looking at the winding road back to town. The riverbank, where the medical blanket was found, was just a few miles away. The connection was undeniable. When the car reached the police garage, technical analysis began that afternoon. The vehicle was placed in a covered tin-roofed shed, kept at a stable temperature to preserve evidence. The forensic team used ultraviolet light to scan the interior, noting a few small fluorescent spots on the passenger floor, but not enough to confirm as blood. Samples were collected and stored. They checked the pedals, steering wheel, and gear shift, finding no signs of a struggle. Barnes requested the floor mats be removed to check for fluids or foreign objects. Only damp soil and dried leaves were found underneath. Preliminary analysis confirmed the soil matched samples from the riverbank, but this wasn't conclusive enough. The technical unit issued a temporary report by day's end. No signs of violence inside the vehicle, no clear blood evidence. Wood marks and hair of unidentified origin. Results insufficient for criminal basis. Barnes read the conclusion, folded it, and filed it. He understood that while finding the Chevrolet Fleetline was a significant step, it wasn't yet evidence for conviction. The victim's car, abandoned in a desolate area, had no witnesses or direct traces pointing to its last driver. In the summary report, he added a brief note. Vehicle may have been moved to its current location after the incident. Next investigative focus, connection between soil, hair, and previously found evidence. Outside, dusk fell, and snow began to thicken. The black car, now silent in the police garage, was the only tangible evidence left from the night Evelyn vanished. Barnes stood gazing through the frosted window, a sense of unease rising. Every trace existed waiting to be read correctly. When the forensic report on the Chevrolet Fleetline landed on his desk, Detective Harold Barnes knew he could delay no longer. All they had were fragmented pieces of evidence, a blanket fragment, a handkerchief, mud stains, and an abandoned car, but no signs of violence or a body to prove a crime had occurred. Still, he decided to summon Richard Allen Pierce for another interview, hoping a direct confrontation might reveal something. The next morning, Pierce arrived at the station, dressed impeccably as if heading to work. He shook Barnes's hand, nodded slightly, his face calm to the point of being unreadable. In the interrogation room, Barnes got straight to the point, presenting the investigation's findings and asking directly if Pierce knew about Evelyn's car being found in the outskirts. Pierce merely shrugged, saying, "She might have left it there before leaving," and repeated his old story. Evelyn wanted to rest for a few days, possibly taking a bus elsewhere. When asked why he didn't report her missing after losing contact, he replied, "She often did that when she needed peace. I didn't think it was unusual." Barnes noted the deft defensiveness. Pierce showed no fear, nor did he react when pressed about the traces found at his home. When the gasoline smell and blood in the sink were mentioned, Pierce gave a tired smile, saying he was fixing a generator and had a minor hand injury. Every explanation stayed within the bounds of reason, rendering the confrontation futile. After nearly 2 hours of questioning, Barnes realized he'd get nothing more. The meeting ended with Pierce's feigned politeness and the detective's silence. In the weeks that followed, The police continued searching around the area where the car was found, expanding to abandoned farms, riverbanks, and even old mine shafts. Thick snow, frozen river water, and rock-hard ground met them. Each dig ended in disappointment. No body, no new witnesses, no clues to clarify what had happened. The technical unit confirmed the hair in the car could belong to a man, but 1952 technology couldn't identify it. The blanket fragment and handkerchief showed contact with blood, but it couldn't be confirmed as Evelyn's. Every piece of the case file lacked a critical link. In internal meetings, the Larimer County prosecutor bluntly stated that the case lacked criminal elements. He emphasized that all current evidence was circumstantial, and without a victim's body, no crime could be established. Under Colorado law, a murder charge couldn't be pursued without proof of death. Barnes argued that Pierce's suspicious behavior and verified romantic conflict provided enough basis to continue, but the final decision rested with the prosecution, who held firm to legal reasoning. A memo sent to the department concluded, "No body, no case." The spring months passed in stalemate. Local interest waned. The press stopped mentioning the disappearance. Margaret Moore still visited the station weekly, asking for updates, only to receive helpless headshakes. Though he didn't admit it publicly, Barnes had Pierce surveilled for a time, but the man lived normally, going to work, socializing, occasionally attending bank events. Everything on the surface was clean, except for a past that couldn't be erased. By mid-1952, with no progress, the Fort Collins Police Department officially suspended the investigation. The thick file, numbered #219 Moore/1951, was sent to the county archives. Before signing the closure, Barnes reread every report, photo, and statement. He felt something lingered in the gaps between the fragmented evidence, a logic, not yet complete, that he couldn't grasp. Still, the law allowed him to go no further. By late summer, Richard Pierce quietly sold his Fort Collins home and moved to Arizona. He requested an internal bank transfer, continuing his career as if nothing had happened. No one knew the day he left. Barnes only spotted a house sale notice in the local paper. He tore out the clipping, folded it, and tucked it into the file. In his duty log, he wrote a single line, "Insufficient evidence to arrest, but I believe we've let a guilty man leave this town." Outside, winter was returning, the wind carrying the familiar damp chill of the Cache La Poudre River. For Harold Barnes, Evelyn Moore's disappearance ended on paper, but in his mind, it began to form a nameless shadow in Fort Collins' memory. Nearly 6 decades passed since Evelyn Moore's case was shelved as an unsolved mystery. Fort Collins had changed, but in the Colorado Bureau of Investigation's archives, hundreds of old files sat quietly in gray boxes, numbered by year, gathering dust. In early 2010, the state approved the Cold Case Review Program to apply modern DNA testing to cases limited by outdated technology. Among the investigators selected was Detective Rachel Barnes, a 35-year-old officer with CBI's Special Investigations Unit. She was Harold Barnes's granddaughter, who had led the 1951 Evelyn Moore case. When a list of missing persons cases reached her desk, Rachel noticed the name Moore and Fort Collins among hundreds of others. Something made her pause and open the nearly 200-page file. Inside were yellowed papers, her grandfather's handwritten blue ink notes, interrogation records, crime scene photos, and a faded forensic report. No body, insufficient evidence. Among the pages, Rachel found a small, carefully sealed evidence bag, marked 219 Moore 1951, with H. Barnes signed on it. Inside were 3 items packaged separately: a white women's handkerchief embroidered with EM, a fabric piece from a medical blanket, a vial of soil, and a paper envelope with a few long hairs. That the evidence remained sealed after all these years was rare. It showed Harold Barnes had preserved everything meticulously. Rachel documented the seal's condition, signed a receipt, and sent the evidence to Denver's Central Archive for re-examination. Under the new protocol, all evidence would be processed with next-generation DNA extraction technology, capable of identifying biological traces even from faint or minute samples. CBI's lab, in collaboration with Colorado State University's forensic unit, began testing. The hair sample was prioritized. Under a microscope, analysts found the hair root still contained cellular nuclei, allowing complete DNA extraction. The medical blanket fragment, scanned under fluorescent light, revealed small brownish spots, likely oxidized blood. A portion was cut, soaked in an enzyme solution, and processed through a PCR machine for gene amplification. The soil sample was analyzed concurrently to identify minerals, comparing them to areas around Fort Collins at the time. While awaiting results, Rachel read the entire old file, nearly every line her grandfather wrote. He detailed the crime scene, the gasoline smell in the suspect's house, the blanket fragment by the river, and the Chevrolet Fleetline abandoned miles from town. She realized Evelyn Moore's case was a classic of manual investigation, correct instincts but no tools to prove them. Among the notes, Rachel found a fading handwritten line, "If science advances one more step, we might know the truth." 3 weeks later, the test results arrived at CBI's office. The 40-plus page report, summarized in one bolded line, DNA results confirm, blood sample on fabric and hair and evidence bag match. Evelyn Moore's biological profile from 1951 hospital records. Male DNA on the handkerchief shows a 99.98% probability match with Richard Allen Pierce's genetic profile, age 82, residing in Boulder, Colorado. Rachel read each sentence slowly, feeling time stand still. A disappearance dormant for nearly 60 years now showed signs of a true crime, and the man once deemed the prime suspect with insufficient evidence was clearly named in the forensic report. She immediately drafted a report for CBI's leadership, requesting to reopen the investigation under the old case number 219 Moore's 1951, updating its status to cold case. Reopened 2010. In her final note, Rachel wrote in firm handwriting, "Evelyn Moore's case reevaluated, based on valid DNA evidence. Evidence intact. Results show a match with suspect Richard A. Pierce. Recommend verifying the subject's current residence and activities." As she signed, a copy of the old file lay beside her. H. Barnes, 1952, still clear. 2 generations of investigators, separated by time, now converged on a single case file. The DNA report sent to the Colorado Bureau of Investigation opened an entirely new path for the Evelyn Moore case. After nearly 60 years, the small samples once deemed insufficient became the investigation's cornerstone. To ensure objectivity, CBI conducted cross-verification at 3 independent labs, including Colorado State University's Forensic Analysis Center and the Federal Criminal Science Lab in Denver. The samples were divided, transported under secure protocol, with each lab verifying a portion. The first lab confirmed the DNA fully matched Evelyn Moore's genetic profile from 1951 hospital records stored at Poudre Valley. The blood on the medical blanket fragment matched that sequence 100%. The male DNA, extracted from epithelial cells on the handkerchief, was cross-checked with the state's criminal database, yielding a 99.98% probability match with Richard Allen Pierce, born 1919, residing in Boulder, Colorado. Analysts concluded the likelihood of 2 unrelated individuals sharing that genetic sequence was near zero. For the first time in the case's history, Richard Pierce's name was directly tied to evidence collected at the scene. Alongside the DNA results, CBI's forensic geology team analyzed the 1951 soil sample, remarkably well preserved, dry, free of mold. Under an electron microscope, they identified minerals, feldspar, fine quartz, and high calcium levels, characteristic of the limestone-rich soil along Fort Collins' southern riverbanks. Rachel requested further comparison, sending a team to collect 12 small soil samples from the former site of Pierce's 1950s home, now a residential area, around the shed and backyard. Analysis showed the mineral composition, pH, and fine particle ratio nearly perfectly matched the evidence soil. The technical report concluded, soil origin has a 97% probability of coming from the area around the suspect's former residence. For Rachel, this was clear geological evidence linking Pierce's home to the 1951 evidence site. The investigation didn't stop there. Additional analysis of the medical blanket fragment used synthetic fiber testing, identifying a cotton viscose blend, twill woven, with rare fluorescent thread stitching. Cross-referencing Colorado's 1949-1952 medical supply records showed only one Denver manufacturer supplied such blankets to public hospitals, including Poudre Valley, where Evelyn worked. This meant the blanket fragment found by the Cache La Poudre River likely came from her workplace. This finding strengthened the hypothesis that the victim was harmed by someone close, with access to her personal items. Rachel Barnes compiled all the new data into a 4-part analysis: biological evidence, geological evidence, origin of physical evidence, and connection to the suspect. The report clearly stated, 1. The evidence was preserved intact, proving an unbroken chain of custody. 2. Male and female DNA identified 2 specific individuals, Evelyn Moore and Richard Allen Pierce. 3. Soil samples and the medical blanket fragment established a geographical link between the suspect's residence and the evidence discovery site. 4. No evidence suggested the involvement of a third party in this chain. Concurrently with the technical analyses, Rachel investigated Pierce's personal history. Boulder residency records showed he had lived at the same address for over 20 years, briefly worked as a financial consultant after retirement, and had no prior arrests or investigations in other cases. She also searched the state's judicial database and found a 1952 record noting insufficient evidence to prosecute. Suspect relocated out of Colorado. This reinforced her belief that the case was stalled not due to lack of suspicion, but because of the era's technical limitations. In a late-month review meeting, CBI presented all findings to the Colorado Forensic Board. Experts from 3 independent fields, genetics, geochemistry, and materials science, confirmed the results' validity. The board's chairman concluded concisely, the new evidence provides sufficient grounds to reopen the investigation as a homicide. Rachel was tasked with drafting a formal proposal for the Larimer County Prosecutor's Office. The 12-page proposal to reopen the investigation, prepared in 2 days, was concise yet comprehensive. It outlined the evidence preservation process, described the DNA results, geological analysis, forensic conclusions about the blanket, and the victim's professional connection. The report's final section used clear legal language. Forensic results confirmed the presence of both victim and suspect in the same evidence chain. Pursuant to Section 18.3.102 of the Colorado Criminal Code, we recommend reactivating the case under the charge of first-degree murder. When submitting the report to her superiors, Rachel said little. She placed the documents on the desk, next to a 1951 photo of Evelyn Moore from the case file. A youthful face with a calm gaze. She understood that scientific results, no matter how precise, were mere numbers without further investigative action. In her personal notebook, she wrote a simple line, echoing one her grandfather wrote over half a century earlier: "Science doesn't just prove what happened, it brings the forgotten back." After the forensic report was approved and the proposal to reopen the case accepted, the investigation team's first step was to verify the former residence of Richard Allen Pierce from the 1950s. According to archived records, the house was on Riverside Drive, near the Cache La Poudre River, now owned by another family. The current owners, informed of the investigation's purpose, consented to a forensic survey. On Monday morning, CBI's criminalistics team arrived at the site. The house had been renovated multiple times, but the core structure remained, a small wooden home with an old concrete shed in the back, its smooth floor connecting to a backyard. That shed, per Harold Barnes's 1951 notes, was where he had detected a strange gasoline smell and spotted a shovel propped in the corner. Rachel, part of the team, felt the past and present align. She carried a copy of her grandfather's old crime scene photos, matching details like the door, roof and concrete foundations orientation. Ground-penetrating radar was set up after the area was cordoned off. A faint white paint grid was sprayed on the floor to guide the scan. The radar's display showed consistent wave reflections, indicating soil and materials beneath. About 3 hours into the scan, a technician detected an anomalous signal at a depth of 50 to 60 centimeters, with irregular wave patterns. Rachel ordered a pause to isolate the area. A handheld scanner confirmed a mass roughly the size of a human body beneath the concrete near the shed's back wall. The on-site report noted, mixed reflective signal, organic materials surrounded by inconsistent materials, suspected to be human remains. Excavation began the next day. A 6-person forensic team, under CBI supervision, carefully broke the concrete with specialized tools to avoid damaging what lay beneath. As the concrete was removed, damp soil with a rusty iron smell emerged. After a few shovel strokes, a technician spotted a frayed white-blue fabric mixed with dark brown earth. They paused, recorded the scene, measured coordinates, and continued brushing away soil. Beneath the fabric were long bones, neatly arranged as if deliberately placed. Surrounding them were medical-grade woven fabric, remnants mixed with sand and wood fragments. The remains were wrapped in an old medical blanket, tied with cloth strips, heavily decomposed but structurally intact. While separating the fabric, a technician found a small metal object at the chest area. A delicate silver necklace with a pendant engraved with EM. The item was photographed in place before being sealed in an evidence bag. The excavation continued until late afternoon. Once fully uncovered, forensic experts identified the remains as those of an adult female, approximately 1.63 meters tall, matching Evelyn Moore's hospital records. No other personal items were found except the necklace and fabric scraps. The ground beneath showed signs of being tightly compacted, suggesting careful tamping before the concrete was poured. Standing outside the scene's perimeter, Rachel felt a heavy silence envelop the site. She knew they were unearthing not just soil and bones, but a truth buried for over half a century. The remains were transported to the Colorado Bureau of Investigation's Forensic Examination Lab in 2 specialized containers. There, experts conducted anthropological and trauma analysis. Initial findings showed clear signs of violence. The hyoid bone was cleanly broken. Cervical vertebrae had small fractures consistent with manual or soft object strangulation. The skull had 2 long cracks, one deeper, matching a heavy blunt force impact. No surgical or prior injury marks were found. The clothing and blanket around the body were contaminated with oil and gasoline residue, indicating an attempt to destroy or conceal evidence before burial. After preliminary examination, the chief medical examiner signed the official conclusion: cause of death asphyxiation by strangulation combined with traumatic brain injury. Clear evidence of violent action, death determined unnatural. DNA samples from the bones were taken to cross-reference with prior results, confirming the victim's identity. That same day, all scene reports, photos, and samples were sent to CBI. Rachel drafted a summary report for her superiors, stating, "Discovered adult female remains at Richard A. Pierce's former residence. Evidence includes a medical blanket, a silver necklace engraved with EM, and signs of violence consistent with victim Evelyn Moore. Recommend upgrading the case from missing person to homicide." That evening, as the team left the scene, dim yellow light from the small house reflected off the freshly exposed concrete. In Fort Collins' cold wind, the white paint lines from the morning survey still bore traces of soil, like a fragile boundary between past and present. For Rachel, this excavation wasn't just a professional task, but a moment of fulfilling an unfinished promise her grandfather wrote in his 1952 notes. If science ever rediscovers the traces, let the truth be told. With the excavation and forensic reports complete, Rachel Barnes's next task was to strengthen the case with witness testimonies and related documents to close the evidence chain. She began by reviewing 1950s Fort Collins residency records for neighbors around Pierce's home. Few were still alive, most over 80. She contacted each, sending formal letters and meeting those able to travel in person. The first was Walter Jenkins, 89, who lived 2 houses from Pierce during the disappearance. The interview took place at a nursing home north of town. When Rachel mentioned Evelyn Moore, he paused long before nodding. "I remember," he said, voice trembling. "The whole neighborhood was buzzing. Everyone said the girl vanished, but that Pierce guy acted like nothing happened." Showing him a photo of the old property, he pointed to the shed and said he saw Pierce there days after the disappearance. "I was clearing my car and saw him digging in the backyard with a shovel and some cloth sacks. I asked what he was doing. He said fixing a water pipe, but I didn't see any plumbers." When pressed on timing, he estimated it was 2 or 3 days after the disappearance hit the papers. His account matched Harold Barnes' 1951 notes, which also suspected digging in that area. Rachel recorded the testimony, cross-referencing it with the neighborhood map, confirming Jenkins' described location matched the excavation site. Despite his age, his memory was clear and deemed reliable. She also met Helen Cooper, 86, a former What a Tavern server in 1951. Cooper confirmed Evelyn and Pierce were at the tavern the night of the disappearance, appearing to argue. Pierce held the car keys and escorted Evelyn out. Her testimony supplemented old witness records, showing no one else left with them. After interviewing living witnesses, Rachel sought out-of-state records on Pierce. Knowing he moved to Arizona after the case closed, she faced challenges as pre-1960 records weren't digitized. Contacting Arizona's Justice Department, she accessed court records. A 1954 Phoenix arrest caught her attention. Pierce was charged with assaulting his girlfriend Carol Myers after an argument. The report described attacking with hands, strangling the victim, causing minor injuries. Myers withdrew the complaint, the case was dropped, and it was filed as a minor offense, not prosecuted. However, the Phoenix police report noted Pierce frequently displayed possessive, intensely jealous behavior and sudden violent outbursts when rejected. Rachel requested copies of the file, sent to Denver for review. Compiling the new data, Pierce's behavioral pattern emerged consistently: a polite man in public with a history of controlling and abusing partners, repeated over time. The 1954 Phoenix case became key circumstantial evidence, proving systematic violent behavior. Rachel also found a note in Pierce's bank employment records from his manager. Frequently absent without reason for days, returns to work normally, avoids discussing personal life. Though not criminal evidence, it reinforced Pierce's pattern of temporary withdrawals during significant events. For legal rigor, Rachel created a 3-part evidence table: direct witnesses, indirect witnesses, and behavioral records. The first included Jenkins and Cooper's testimonies, the second, the Phoenix case and personnel note. The third, previously confirmed forensic evidence. Her behavioral analysis report concluded, Richard Allen Pierce exhibits a repeated pattern of violent behavior, motivated by jealousy and capable of deliberate crime concealment. Witness testimony about post-disappearance digging and the Arizona assault record support the forensic evidence, strengthening the case for first-degree murder prosecution. As Rachel printed the final report, she paused before signing. On the first page, Evelyn Moore case, Fort Collins, 1951, sat below her name and Cold Case Review, 2010. The nearly 60-year gap between the lines reflected the era's changes, technology, law, and the pursuit of justice. With new testimonies and validated evidence, Richard Allen Pierce's file was no longer a forgotten page, but the center of an investigation closing the circle Harold Barnes began. With witness testimonies and supplemental records collected, Rachel's team shifted focus to in-depth forensic analysis, the final step to solidify the prosecution case. All evidence, from old DNA samples to excavated remains, was sent to CBI's Forensic Examination Lab in Denver. There, top experts in genetics, anthropology, and toolmark analysis collaborated to verify the evidence chain linking to Richard Allen Pierce. First was genetic analysis. 3 main samples, bones, hair, and blood, were processed separately to rule out cross-contamination. Bone samples from the femur and ribs well preserved in the damp soil under concrete, were cleaned, ground, and DNA extracted via specialized decalcification. The 1951 hair and blood samples were checked for integrity before gene amplification. Results showed all samples shared the same female genetic source, fully matching Evelyn Moore's DNA reference from Poudre Valley Hospital records. The male DNA from the 1951 evidence was analyzed concurrently, again matching Richard Allen Pierce's biological profile. This consistency formed a closed evidence chain, proving the suspect's presence at the crime scene and direct contact with the victim. The report concluded, no possibility of a third party. DNA match probability rules out random coincidence at 1 in 480 trillion. After completing the genetic analysis, the forensic mechanics team continued examining the injuries on the skeletal remains. The skull fractures were scanned with a 3D CT machine and compared to reference samples from common blunt objects. The longitudinal cracks with a roughly 3 cm circular indentation suggested impact from a hard, metallic object consistent with the head of an M1943 military shovel issued by the U.S. Army during World War II. Military records confirmed Pierce served in Europe and was issued this exact shovel in 1944. Impact simulation conducted by a forensic physicist using a silicone model showed the force required to cause such injuries matched that of a swing from an adult male. The report concluded, skull injury caused by blunt force, likely a military shovel, resulting in bone fractures and immediate loss of consciousness. The hyoid bone and cervical vertebrae were also thoroughly examined. 2 clear horizontal fractures, characteristic of manual strangulation or use of a highly elastic soft object, such as fabric or a blanket, were identified. The simultaneous presence of skull trauma and neck fractures indicated the victim didn't die immediately from the blow, but was strangled to death. Analysis of the fabric wrapped around the body showed stretched fibers at the edges, consistent with being used to bind or wrap around the neck. These details, when combined, reconstructed a relatively precise attack mechanism, an initial blow to stun, followed by strangulation leading to death. The forensic chemistry team analyzed the soil around the body and blanket fragment. Results revealed volatile hydrocarbons, specifically gasoline and engine oil residue. The concentration was significantly higher than in the surrounding soil, indicating the body was doused with gasoline or a cleaning solvent to erase odors and biological traces before burial. The report noted, the use of solvents on evidence is indicative of deliberate intent to conceal the crime. Additionally, city construction records confirmed a permit application for shed renovation under Richard Pierce's name on December 28, 1951, indicating the concrete was poured over the burial site days after the victim's disappearance. The findings from each specialty were compiled into a comprehensive forensic report, over 80 pages long, with a concise yet clear conclusion. Based on genetic, mechanical, and chemical evidence, there is sufficient basis to determine that victim Evelyn Moore died from deliberate violent acts by an individual with physical capacity matching Richard Allen Pierce. The condition of the body and evidence indicates planned concealment and destruction of traces. Rachel Barnes reviewed the complete report in CBI's small meeting room. On the table were newly sealed evidence bags, each bearing codes matching the 1951 originals, now supplemented with modern forensic certifications. She spent hours checking each page, ensuring all results were clearly sourced and dated. At the end, the bolded line evidence chain unbroken stood out. This meant all evidence from 1951 to 2010 retained legal integrity, a rarity in cold cases. That same day, Rachel drafted a memo to CBI leadership, accompanied by a formal recommendation to the Larimer County Prosecutor's Office. The recommendation summarized, current physical and forensic evidence is sufficient to prove murder and concealment of the body. We request the prosecutor's office consider initiating the process for an arrest warrant for Richard Allen Pierce, born 1919, residing in Boulder, Colorado. Before signing, Rachel paused for a few seconds, looking at the final line in the forensic report. Evelyn Moore, identity confirmed 100% positive. She closed the file. feeling part of her grandfather's work was complete, and the rest, bringing the perpetrator to justice, now rested with her. The comprehensive CBI forensic report was not only technical, but also the foundation for transitioning the case from investigation to criminal prosecution. Upon receiving the file, the Larimer County Prosecutor's Office immediately convened an interdisciplinary meeting to evaluate all evidence. The meeting included Chief Prosecutor Laura Bailey, CBI's investigation team led by Rachel Barnes, and 2 independent criminologists from Colorado State University. Their task was to analyze not only physical evidence, but also behavioral factors to determine Richard Allen Pierce's motive and criminal pattern. A man now in his 80s at the center of a crime from nearly 60 years ago. In the first presentation, criminologists provided a psychological profile based on all old and new records. The assessment began, Richard Allen Pierce exhibits a pattern of controlling, possessive, and violently reactive behavior when threatened with loss of control. The analysis noted that Pierce and Evelyn Moore's relationship followed a classic intimate partner violence pattern, initial charm and care, followed by control and isolation, culminating in violence when the victim attempted to leave. Pierce's 1954 Arizona history of strangling a girlfriend further supported this. That case's behavior mirrored the mechanism of Evelyn Moore's death as determined by forensics. The experts also noted that Pierce's perfect social facade as a veteran, banker, and polite figure indicated a typical ability to mask deviant behavior common in individuals with control-oriented personality disorders. This explained why, during the 1951-1952 investigation, Pierce never panicked or fled. He believed no one could prove his guilt without a body. The psychological report concluded Pierce's act of murder was not entirely impulsive, but the culmination of prolonged escalation. The motive was jealousy and fear of losing control over the victim. The meeting then focused on legal evaluation. Prosecutor Laura Bailey stated that the elements of the crime were clear. First, DNA confirmed the suspect and victim's presence in the same evidence chain, ruling out random coincidence. Second, physical traces on the bones and blanket proved deliberate assault and concealment. Third, behavioral evidence, witness testimonies, the Arizona assault record, and psychological analysis established motive. Under Colorado law, these elements were sufficient for a first-degree murder charge, premeditated and calculated. In open discussion, some board members questioned the feasibility of prosecuting an 82-year-old, considering health and memory capacity. However, the prosecution affirmed that age does not exempt criminal responsibility, especially for a crime with no statute of limitation. Rachel presented the evidence preservation process, proving an unbroken chain to eliminate legal validity doubts. She also emphasized that the murder and body concealment under concrete showed organized criminal intent, not excusable by accident or mental factors. A CBI legal expert added a key analysis. The concrete poured over the burial site, combined with gasoline traces in the soil, constituted post-crime concealment, sufficient to establish premeditation or prior planning, classifying the case at the highest severity under state law. After nearly 3 hours of discussion, all agreed the case met the standards for an arrest warrant and criminal prosecution. At the meeting's end, Chief Prosecutor Laura Bailey read the concluding memo. The 4-page summary confirmed 3 main evidence groups: 1. Physical evidence, DNA, tool marks, matching items; 2. Behavioral evidence, witnesses, prior criminal record, control and jealousy patterns; 3. Concealment evidence, concrete, solvents, and post-crime renovation plans. The memo ended, there is sufficient legal basis to request an emergency arrest warrant for Richard Allen Pierce for first-degree murder, pursuant to Section 18-3102 of the Colorado Criminal Code. The next day, the formal document was finalized and sent to the Larimer County Court. The presiding judge approved it the same day, confirming a lawful statewide arrest warrant. Copies were sent to CBI and the Boulder Police Department, where the suspect resided. Internally, the case status updated to cold case Active arrest warrant issued. When Rachel received the faxed warrant confirmation, she placed it on her desk, glancing out her office window. Denver's winter snow fell, much like her grandfather's old journal described. After 60 years, Richard Allen Pierce's name shifted from unconfirmed suspect to officially wanted. In the digital archive, her signature appeared below, approved by District Attorney Laura Bailey. The long silence of an old case was finally broken by science and justice. On the morning of September 5, 2010, as early snow dusted Boulder's suburban homes, a convoy of CBI and Boulder police vehicles quietly stopped before a small gray single-story house on Juniper Avenue. The house, with closed windows, was where Richard Allen Pierce, 82, had lived quietly for nearly 2 decades. Per the Larimer County Court's arrest warrant, this was the final step in an investigation spanning generations. The operations captain reviewed the arrest protocol one last time. It must proceed orderly, without harm, and be fully recorded for legality. As officers approached the front door, a CBI agent knocked and announced themselves. Seconds later, a frail male voice replied, "I knew you'd come." The door opened slowly. Pierce stood there, in a thick sweater, holding a coffee mug. His face inexplicably calm. He didn't ask why, didn't resist, only nodded slightly as the warrant for first-degree murder in Evelyn Moore's 1951 death was read. When handcuffed, he whispered, "It's been a long time, too long." Pierce was taken to CBI's Denver headquarters for interrogation. In a brightly lit room equipped with modern cameras and microphones, Rachel Barnes sat across from him with a supervising prosecutor. The interrogation was fully recorded per Miranda protocols, ensuring the suspect's legal rights. Initially, Pierce was cooperative. He spoke slowly about his current life, past banking career, old age, and heart condition. When asked about Evelyn Moore, he looked directly at Rachel and said, "I remember her. A good girl. She left me, and I respected that." Rachel, expressionless, opened a file of photos, 1951 crime scene images, and newly excavated evidence: the silver necklace engraved with EM, the medical blanket fragment, and the forensic report. Pierce's hands trembled slightly, but he quickly regained composure. "I don't know where you found those things," he said, "but I never harmed her." Rachel placed a copy of the DNA results before him, stating his genetic markers were found on the victim's handkerchief. He paused, then gave a faint smile. "If you think DNA can speak for a person, I have nothing to say. I've lived long enough to know the truth isn't always what science says." The dialogue lasted over 2 hours, focusing on case specifics. Pierce denied all charges, claiming their relationship ended peacefully. When Rachel mentioned the 1954 Phoenix record of him assaulting a girlfriend, his calm demeanor began to fade. He snapped, "I paid for my mistakes. But you don't understand. I didn't kill anyone." By late morning, Rachel paused the interrogation for a brief break. Upon resuming, she played a video of the Fort Collins excavation. On screen, the concrete was removed, dark soil cleared, and the blanket-wrapped remains appeared. Pierce watched intently, eyes narrowing. When the silver necklace with EM was zoomed in, he took a deep breath, clenching his fists on the table. "I bought that for her," he said softly. Rachel asked, "When did you buy it?" He paused, then answered, "Before Christmas that year. She said she wanted to end it. I didn't want that." His words were halting, his voice hoarse and fading. She stayed silent, letting the pause linger, waiting. After a few minutes, Pierce looked up, staring at the camera, speaking as if to himself. "I just wanted her to stay. I didn't mean to do it. I just kept her." It wasn't a direct confession, but enough for the team to note an indirect admission to the attack, causing Evelyn's death. The prosecutor present marked the statement's timestamp and requested written confirmation. Everything was recorded, filmed, and stored. When asked further about the burial and concrete, Pierce didn't respond, only looked at his hands and said, "I don't remember, it's been too long." Rachel closed the file, ending the first interrogation by reading his rights and informing him a defense attorney would be appointed. While Pierce was transferred to Larimer County's detention facility, Rachel spent the afternoon finalizing the summary report. Every interrogation detail was transcribed verbatim, with video timestamps, highlighting his admission of keeping her. She added a professional note. The suspect shows awareness of past actions, but avoids direct responsibility. Defensive demeanor lessened when confronted with specific evidence, showing genuine emotion in the final stage. That evening, Prosecutor Laura Bailey signed off on the validity of the interrogation file, forwarding it to the prosecution division. The formal charging document was finalized that night, stating, based on the investigation results, forensic findings, and statements of the defendant, Richard Allen Pierce, born 1919. The prosecutor's office charges him with first-degree murder for actions committed in Fort Collins, Colorado, in December 1951. As the case was entered into the system, Rachel stood watching the computer screen display the line, "Case status. Charged. Murder in the first degree." She realized this was no longer just a story in her grandfather's old journals, but a real ongoing case with a living perpetrator. In that moment, the past Fort Collins white snow, the wooden house, and the vanished woman seemed to come alive, as if history was being rewritten, this time with enough evidence to hold the perpetrator accountable before the law. In March 2011, nearly 60 years after Evelyn Moore's disappearance, the Larimer County Court formally opened the trial of Richard Allen Pierce for first-degree murder. On the first day, local and major media outlets crowded the courtroom, drawn not only by the case's severity, but also by the unprecedented time gap between the crime and prosecution. In the courtroom, the front row was reserved for the victim's family, now only distant relatives, as Evelyn's mother had passed away years earlier. Across from them, Richard Pierce sat quietly beside two court-appointed defense attorneys, frail and white-haired, yet with a cold gaze, as if observing a play with a known ending. Chief Prosecutor Laura Bailey opened with a brief but powerful statement. "This is not just a murder case. It is proof that time cannot hide guilt, and science never forgets." She outlined the case in three parts: forensic evidence, witnesses, and motive. In a calm voice, she described the investigation's journey from the 1951 disappearance, the sealed evidence, to modern DNA testing that brought the case back to light. Each piece of evidence was displayed on a large screen: the medical blanket fragment, the handkerchief embroidered with EM, the silver necklace, excavation photos, and finally, the DNA sequence map matching the victim and defendant. Each image silenced the courtroom. Next came expert testimonies. A CBI DNA analyst confirmed all biological samples matched Evelyn Moore and Richard Pierce, with 99.98% accuracy. A forensic chemist detailed the gasoline traces in the soil, proving an attempt to destroy evidence. The chief medical examiner described the bone injuries. The victim was struck hard on the head with a blunt object, then strangled to death. This was intentional, not accidental. As she explained the fractured cervical vertebrae, the courtroom fell silent. Only the faint sound of reporters' pens remained. The witness group included Walter Jenkins, the neighbor who saw Pierce digging after Evelyn's disappearance, and Helen Cooper, the What a Tavern server. Despite their age, both testified clearly. Jenkins spoke slowly but firmly. "I'll never forget seeing him there, shovel in hand, in the cold morning. He said he was fixing a pipe, but no plumber came." His account was supported by excavation photos matching the described location. Cooper recounted the argument between Evelyn and Pierce on the fateful night, confirming Pierce was the last to escort her out. When the prosecution introduced the 1954 Phoenix record as evidence of repeated violent behavior, the defense objected, arguing it was too old and unrelated. However, the judge allowed it as supporting evidence of the defendant's character under the pattern of conduct rule. The prosecution emphasized that the Arizona assault mirrored the violence against Evelyn Moore: control, jealousy, and violence when rejected. By the fifth day, the defense began its rebuttal, focusing on time and age, arguing that prosecuting an 80-year-old for actions at 30 is cruel. Lead defense attorney David Carter claimed witness memories could be distorted and DNA only proved contact, not murder. He portrayed an elderly man overtaken by a confused past. The prosecution countered sharply, "The truth doesn't age. If the crime endures, so does justice." On the sixth day, the defense put Pierce on the stand. He appeared frail, hands trembling, pausing to sip water. He denied the murder, stating, "Evelyn left, and everything else is a tragic coincidence." But when the prosecution played the CBI interrogation video, where he said he just wanted to keep her, the courtroom's atmosphere shifted. Pierce fell silent for a long time, then said softly, "I don't recall what I said. Maybe I was tired." The judge ordered the video replayed for the jury. In it, the elderly man bowed his head, voice breaking mid-sentence. The scene left the courtroom breathless, and enough for the prosecution to conclude, "No one says that except someone who knows what they did." On the seventh day, both sides delivered closing arguments. The prosecution stressed that the case exemplified justice's persistence. Physical, scientific, and behavioral evidence all pointed to Richard Allen Pierce. The defense again requested leniency due to age and health, suggesting a reduced charge of involuntary manslaughter, but the judge rejected it for lack of evidence of unintentionality. On the eighth day, the 12-member jury deliberated. In under 5 hours, they returned a unanimous verdict: guilty. As the judge read the decision, Pierce sat still, eyes on the floor, unresponsive. Rachel Barnes, seated in the investigators' row, clenched her hands. She felt no joy, only relief, like a door closing after over half a century. The trial ended with the judge's words, "Justice never sleeps. It only waits for enough light to pierce the darkness." As the gavel struck, the sound echoed coldly in the large room. Richard Allen Pierce was escorted out in absolute silence. No one spoke. Those present understood they had witnessed not just a trial, but the completion of a nearly 60-year journey. A journey time couldn't erase. The sentencing was set for a Monday morning, 2 weeks after the trial's conclusion. Outside the Larimer County Courthouse, Colorado's sky was overcast, heavy clouds hanging low, as if the town held its breath for a case history had once forgotten. Inside, the gallery was full, mostly reporters, investigators involved, and elderly Fort Collins residents vaguely recalling the 1951 missing nurse. Richard Allen Pierce was led in, still in his old gray suit, collar neatly folded, face expressionless. He sat in the defendant's chair, hands on knees, eyes forward, as if anticipating what was coming. Judge David Holloway took the bench, tapping the gavel lightly for order. He read the jury's nearly 20-page sentencing summary. After reviewing all evidence, including DNA results, witness testimonies, forensic reports, and the defendant's indirect confession in the recorded interrogation, the jury unanimously finds Richard Allen Pierce guilty of first-degree murder of Evelyn Moore, with deliberate planned actions and post-crime concealment. The courtroom remained silent. Only the rustle of pages and the clerk's pen audible. The judge paused, looking directly at the defendant. "Mr. Pierce, 60 years ago, you took the life of a young woman out of selfishness and jealousy. You buried the truth under concrete, thinking time would protect you. But justice does not forget. Scientific evidence has brought you back here to answer for your actions." He then read the verdict aloud. The court sentences the defendant, Richard Allen Pierce, to life imprisonment without parole or sentence reduction. The sentence begins today. In the prosecution's row, Laura Bailey bowed her head slightly, her expression calm. Rachel Barnes sat silently, gripping her grandfather's small notebook, which she'd carried throughout the case. Its first page still bore the faded words, "Justice only sleeps. It never dies." She knew, if he were alive, Harold Barnes might simply smile, not for victory, but because the truth was finally confirmed. Pierce said nothing. When asked if he wished to speak before sentencing, he replied curtly, nothing left to say. His voice was hoarse and low, without remorse or justification. Spectators looked at him with a mix of astonishment and coldness. The man once seen as a community exemplar was now a convicted murderer sentenced to life, proof that a social mask cannot hide guilt forever. After the judge read the sentence, 2 officers approached, handcuffing Pierce. He stood slowly, unresisting, his gaze briefly scanning the crowd, as if searching for someone, then turned away. As he was led out, the gavel struck one final time, marking the official end of a nearly 60-year case. There was no applause, no cheers, just the heavy silence of justice fulfilling its belated mission. Outside, snow began falling lightly, dusting the stone steps in thin white layers. Rachel lingered a few minutes at the entrance, breathing in the icy air. For her, this wasn't just a case's end, but a testament to generations of investigators. Every effort to preserve evidence, every careful note in a file, held value, even if it took half a century to prove. Richard Allen Pierce's life sentence not only closed a criminal case, but sparked a broader dialogue in Colorado about justice, memory, and science. Immediately after sentencing, state media ran the story under bold headlines. Cold Case 1951 solved. After 59 years, DNA brings justice for lost nurse. Fort Collins case reminds us, evidence never dies. Major papers like the Denver Post and Coloradoan devoted pages to recounting the journey from disappearance to resolution, praising the relentless efforts of generations of investigators. A CBS Denver special report drew millions of views, recreating the excavation of Pierce's old home, where the truth awoke after nearly 60 years. Public reaction was profound. In Fort Collins, where the case began, residents saw it as a rekindled shared memory. Many elderly locals recalled the 1951 morning when Evelyn Moore's disappearance spread through town, and the fear and uncertainty that lingered for months. Now, with the mystery solved, they described feeling both relieved and bitter. Justice had arrived, but too late to restore the youth and life of an innocent woman. Colorado State University, where Evelyn studied nursing, held a public discussion on the role of forensic science in cold cases, attended by students in investigation, criminology, and forensic medicine. In mid-April 2011, Fort Collins city government and CBI organized a small memorial for Evelyn Moore at Poudre Valley Hospital, where she worked. No media, no grand slogans, just a quiet mourning with a white floral wreath placed by a plaque reading, "In memory of Evelyn Moore, 1925-1951. Her story reminds us that truth endures. Rachel attended in a simple uniform. As the mayor spoke of the investigator's steadfast example, Rachel stood back, silently gazing at Evelyn's portrait. In the soft sunlight, the face in the photo seemed to smile, no longer a forgotten victim, but a symbol of truth reclaimed. Media also highlighted another aspect, the importance of long-term evidence preservation. In a post-trial press conference, the CBI director stated, "If Detective Harold Barnes hadn't meticulously sealed each sample in 1951, there'd be no case solved in 2010. Evelyn Moore's case proves that every trace, no matter how small, holds value when preserved correctly." Consequently, Colorado issued a new guideline mandating a minimum 75-year retention for evidence in suspected homicide cases, up from 30 years. Other states later referenced this, paving the way for nationwide cold case review programs. Media and criminologists hailed this as a quintessential story of enduring justice. In an interview, local historian Susan Layton said, "What makes this case special isn't just the time but the continuity across generations of investigators. One began, another finished. It's a legacy of faith in justice." Her words were later engraved on a bronze plaque in CBI's Cold Case Gallery, where solved case files are displayed. Among the metal plaques, Moore, Evelyn, Fort Collins 1951, sits centrally, beside old crime scene photos and a replica of the EM engraved silver necklace. The case deeply impacted the professional community. Colorado police and investigation training programs added it to their curricula as an example of evidence chain importance. At the first seminar on this topic, Rachel Barnes was invited to speak, but said only, "Justice rewards the patient." Afterward, young investigators approached her, saying the Evelyn Moore case inspired their pursuit of forensic careers. The case also prompted Fort Collins residents to reflect on their town's history. A local volunteer group established the Evelyn Moore Memorial Scholarship, supporting nursing students, Evelyn's chosen profession before her murder. The fund's website simply states, "For those who carry dedication and patience, like Evelyn." By year's end, CBI's annual report listed the Moore case as one of the Cold Case Review Program's top achievements. The report ended with a quote from the CBI director, "No crime is truly buried if the truth remains in the hands of those who believe in it." For Coloradans, Evelyn Moore's story was not just a solved case, but a reminder that every effort, however small, can forge justice, even after 60 years. On that final late afternoon of the year, as snow fell quietly on Fort Collins, the small memorial plaque at the hospital glowed in golden light, a lasting whisper of the power of faith and perseverance in the pursuit of truth. The story of Evelyn Moore's 1951 Fort Collins case is not just a 60-year investigative journey, but a mirror reflecting enduring values in American society today, where justice, science, and perseverance remain cornerstones of communal trust. When Detective Harold Barnes carefully sealed the EM handkerchief, he couldn't know that meticulous act would unlock the case nearly 60 years later. This detail teaches a profound lesson in a modern society where change is rapid. It's the dedication and integrity in small actions that endure. On another level, Rachel Barnes's journey, following her grandfather to complete an unfinished mission, reflects a quintessentially American value: intergenerational responsibility. She didn't just continue a case, but upheld a refusal to let the past be forgotten. In today's world, facing injustice, wrongdoing, or loss, we must hold fast to the belief that justice may arrive late, but never vanishes, as long as someone remains steadfast in its pursuit. The case also reminds every American of science's role in serving societal ethics. DNA technology is not just a technical advance, but proof that truth can be restored if preserved rightly. From this story, the lesson for us all is to work honestly, preserve carefully what we believe is right, and never underestimate time's power, for time, paired with perseverance and conscience, always leads to justice. Thank you for joining us in following Evelyn Moore's journey to justice, a story reminding us that truth may sleep, but never disappears. Subscribe to the channel to continue with us through other true crime stories, where justice always finds its path.